Hello, and welcome to the Business of Happiness podcast. Hey guys, I'm Dr. Tarryn McCarthy, and welcome to another episode of the Business of Happiness, speaking to finding balance and finding ourselves as women in dentistry, discovering who we are, learning how to navigate these waters of being moms and sisters and partners and daughters, being leaders of our teams, being business owners sometimes, being associates, being partners, and being leaders of our patient care, and also finding the time and the mindset and the emotional well-being to take care of ourselves. So welcome to this episode. And I wanted to share with you right out of the gate a story about client of mine who's going through quite a bit of change in her life right now. In fact, it almost feels like everything is in change. Her change in the growth of her children. Her children are growing up and leaving the home. She's doing a huge renovation on her practice. So literally in her office, there are things changing on a daily basis. They're tearing down walls. She's seeing patients at the same time. They're changing ductwork and electrical wiring and bringing in new cabinetry and equipment every day. And so it's always a moving target. And it's been very strategically planned so that they don't stop seeing patients for a moment. And she's noticing changes in her body as she's going through perimenopause, changes in her family. She just recently lost elderly members of her family, and she's just feeling this very challenging time of instability and not knowing whether she has any control. And I thought this is such a beautiful story to bring forth to our audience today, because so often we find ourselves in so much fear of change. We want to feel like we have a control over something, whether it's the stability of our practice or the integrity of our job, right? If you're not owning your own practice but working for someone, you constantly feel the need to have, security in your position. And instability in the economy can make us feel like we're standing on wet sand, moving underneath us. And especially when in the political climate, we're not sure what the future brings. It brings up these same fears of change. And even though intellectually we know that change is the only constant, we know this biologically, scientifically. The body you're sitting in right now, listening to this episode in the spring of 2025, end of winter, beginning of spring of 2025, is not the same body as it was 6 months ago. Cellularly, you are a different human today, not just in terms of your flesh and blood, but in terms of your growth, in terms of the learning you've had from 6 months ago. And if you've been on this journey of personal development, spiritual and emotional development, you're most certainly not the same person you were 6 months ago. I always say this around my birthday. People will start at this point in my life. I just turned 48, and people will say, I won't ask how old you are. And I always feel like, no, I've earned these 48 years of growth and of new insight. I celebrate my age every year and never look at it as a threat or a limitation, but rather a celebration of all the growth and the new learning and understanding that I have. It continues every year, so change is ever present. And when we look back over change, we really start to see the value of it. Thank God I'm not the same person I was 10 years ago. Oh my gosh, she would have run her practice so differently. She would have parented so differently. I'm so grateful for change. I'm so grateful for the house I'm sitting in, which is a different house from the one I sat in 10 years ago. I'm so grateful for my children, the ages they are today, which is so different from the sweet children they were 10 years ago. Change is a part of our lives. It's an ever-present part of our life. And it's so interesting to look at why it is we fear change so much. And it makes so much sense because we think that we have this illusion of control. We think that we can control the things around us. And it's so interesting because it is setting ourselves up for disappointment, thinking we can control anything. Because the truth is we can't control a thing. We can't control people outside of us. We can't control the economy, essentially. We can't control what other people think about us or how they react. In dentistry, we try so hard to control everything in our power when it comes to treating our patients. But essentially, even the treatment we have is out of our control. We talked a lot about this in our last episode about how we do this beautiful artistry in patients' mouths, and then we send them out into the world to eat and speak and function and brush or not brush, floss or not floss on this beautiful artwork that we've done inside their mouths. Really completely out of our control. And it doesn't matter how much foot stamping and tantrum throwing we have. Things are out of our control. I notice this most notably in parenting when I think, gosh, if my kids would just do what I told them to do, and I can get angry about it, and I can get insistent about it, and I can even punish them for not doing things that I asked them to do, and still I do not have control. Essentially. Yes, we have influence. But we don't have control. And there's a certain amount of beauty in that. Because by not having control, we allow ourselves to be open to new possibilities. How many times have things worked out in your life where you thought, oh my gosh, thank God it didn't happen the way I wanted it to happen? If I had had everything play out the way I wanted it to play out, it would never have been as good as it is now. Think about the most difficult times in my life, looking back on it. And if we bring this back to dentistry, those moments when my practice was really struggling, when I was barely able to pay the bills, when I fire sailed my practice, I couldn't see another way out. I was so mortified, so ashamed. Felt so incapable and hopeless, really felt so low about myself. And I think at the time I thought to myself, gosh, if this just didn't happen. Now when I look back, it's one of the greatest gifts. It allowed me to shift out of the state where I was working. It allowed me to start a new practice from scratch. It gave me space and time to get to better know myself and understand what values were important to me, to reassess what matters so that I could build my new practice from a place of deeper understanding of myself and not just building on what someone else thought was good for me. It was the greatest gift. And yet it was the change I feared the most. Now I bring you back to the story of my client who's doing so much renovation in her practice right now, and she's experiencing so much change. So she's feeling a little vulnerable. And every time a new change happens, the thought comes over her, why is this happening to me? Why is everything feeling so unstable? I'm going to give you a little bit of a perspective shift if you're experiencing that right now, if you're feeling that same heaviness of the changes around you, feeling like you don't have control over them and not knowing what the outcome will be. That fear of how's this going to turn out, right? Okay, fine. I'm okay with change. Let's be okay with change. But how's it going to turn out? Is it going to turn out in my favor? I'm going to give you this little insight. So one of the big moments that happened to my client, she's in the middle of renovation. And all of a sudden, all the phone lines and all the internet in her practice shuts off. And in this digital dental age where we are so reliant on our phones and on our landlines, on our computers and on the Wi-Fi, everything shut down. Yes, she could still treat her patients who were in the chair, but she couldn't look at their records. She couldn't look at their treatment plans. She couldn't call anyone to let them know. She couldn't look at the schedule for the day. She couldn't, 90% of her team's tasks for the day were limited immediately in that instant. And of course, we go to that place of fear now. Who can I blame? So, some of the team members were starting to get angry at the people who were renovating, the contractor. The contractors were going into fear. And I was talking to my client about this experience, this change, this unexpected change in her day. And I said, what happened for you? How did you feel about it? And she said, what was so interesting? I surprised myself. I was completely calm. I went outside to where the contractor was looking at what had happened, where they dug up into the street and into the parking lot, and they were looking at the fiber optics underground. And I realized how stressed out they were. And I realized what an insignificant thing this was. Nothing bad had happened. No one got hurt. Everyone was safe. And these poor contractors and the people who were diligently working on the renovation looked so stressed and so frustrated, and they felt so bad about what was going on. And she said, all I know is that I was very calm. I started joking with them, and I started reminding them that this wasn't the end of the world, and I knew that the calmer they stayed, the sooner they'd be able to find the source of the problem, and the sooner they'd be able to fix what I needed them to fix. And I thought, isn't that so fascinating? Change allows us to see ourselves. In that moment, she witnessed a strength in herself that when people around her start falling apart, she comes back to the place of solidarity and strength. An enormous superpower, a unique superpower. Her comfort with change has started to grow. She has started to see the gift in change. Change allows us to see ourselves if we are open to it. Change allows us to see what we are made of and what hurts. It allows us to recognize the fears and the concerns and the worries that we're still holding on to. We allow ourselves to see that, wow, I really thought this whole time I had control here, and I'm recognizing I don't, and that it's still okay. I offer you now, if you're listening to this episode, this thought. I'm open to change. I welcome change. Every moment presents a wonderful new opportunity to become more of who I am. In fact, it's change that allows us to become more of who we are, even in the dental space. It allows us to see ourselves. Change, whether it's downturn or upturn, whether it's a win or a perceived loss, it allows us to see ourselves and recognize our strengths and our weaknesses. Identifying those weaknesses are beautiful. If you're struggling through a change right now, honor that. It allows you to see for yourself what matters. We don't fear what we don't love. We don't fear losing something we don't love. We don't fear a challenging outcome if it's not something we really love to begin with. So what would it take for you to just imagine feeling open to change? What would it take for you to allow yourself to think, can I be open to change? Because change is also the only way we see growth. Change doesn't always have to be difficult. Change doesn't always have to be painful or unwanted or surprising. Change is how we grow. Change is how you earn more money in your bank account. Change is how you become a better leader. Change is how you move a tooth. It's change. We rely on change. And what would it take for you to be more open to it? Because it's when we resist it that it becomes more painful. what would it look like to flow with change and to allow yourself to experience change more effortlessly? I picture this picture right now of someone clinging on to something, digging their fingernails into it, trying to hold on to it, prevent it from changing or moving. And imagine that tension and all the energy that it takes to hold on to something so tightly. Now imagine the allowance of it and the energetic release of it. Just giving yourself permission to go with the flow. It's almost like swimming upstream or just floating down it and letting that river take you. And that analogy might seem a little out there, but really we allow ourselves to see what we're made of when we welcome the change, whether it's a new position in your practice, whether it's a new job, whether it's a new home, whether it's a new relationship. Change allows us to see ourselves for who we are. And what would it take for you to give yourself permission to change? Give your environment permission to change and not hold on so tightly to try to control and prevent the change, because the change might be miraculous. One of the components of welcoming change is developing self-trust. And I think trusting ourselves to be able to, rise up to the change, rise up to the challenge, to be prepared as much as we can for new events, for new outcomes. And that requires building that sense of self-trust. And sometimes we need a little support in that realm. The truth is, you are absolutely capable of facing any change. You always have been. If you look back over your life and you realize, wow, I really have faced every challenge that has come my way, you really are worthy of it. It's that reminder that you are that's so important. I am capable of change. So perhaps in addition to the thought, I am open to new and changing, maybe it is also, I trust that I am worthy of facing and being open to that change, of being ready to handle anything that comes my way. And remember, beliefs are just thoughts we keep thinking over and over and over again. So even if these are feeling new to you and you think, oh my gosh, that feels so far-fetched for me, I can't trust myself, I welcome you to play with some of that language. Allow yourself to say it over and over again. Maybe as you drive to work every day, I trust that I can face anything that comes my way. I trust that I can face any new changes. And see how that sits after a few days. Just welcome it into your language. And just see what changes for you in terms of your own self-confidence and your own willingness to be open to change, because it's in change, it's in the unknown that all possibilities live. Well, thank you for hearing me today, and thank you for being here with this podcast. I hope there was something that rang true for you, that gave you inspiration and empowerment. And remember, when you feel good, that is when you can do good. Bye-bye. Thank you for listening to the Business of Happiness podcast. If this episode brought you new perspective and value, I invite you to subscribe so that you catch all upcoming episodes and leave us a review. And if you know of a friend or colleague who could benefit from this perspective, share this episode with them and empower their day. For more information about the Business of Happiness and the Radical Happiness for Practitioners course, find me on www.thebizofhappiness.com. See you there.